live from Michigan State University. This is the MSU Comics Forum. We're back with more great, scintillating conversations. Do you like comics? Do you like culture? Then you are in the right place. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Wolfman. No, that's horrible. I'm sorry. It's a very long day.
Started that way.
That's right. Random House is #1, right?
You are in the right place. This is the MSU Comics Forum 2021, presented virtually. We are coming back online with our schedule after our lunch break. Hopefully you had a time to go outside and see the sun. If you're not in Michigan, you can do that. I am happy to introduce our 2 o'clock panel, which is behind the scenes of graphic novel publishing. This is a panel focused on Random House, but actually I think one of the great things about this is an opportunity, of course, for us to peek behind the scenes and sort of think about comics and graphic novels and some of the structural issues related to publishing to help shape the landscape that we are experiencing as scholars and as consumers. So this is a great opportunity for us to have professionals in the publishing industry join us. So I'm gonna turn this over to the panel and allow them to handle their introductions. And we will, of course, as always, be monitoring the stream. So once the panel has their sort of introductions and start conversation, as you're filtering questions into the stream, we will monitor that and make sure that the panel is made aware of your questions. So I'll turn it over to you, Gwen. Thank you. You're in charge here.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Gwen Tarbox, and I'm a professor in the Department of English at Western Michigan University, where I teach comic studies and children's literature. And I'm really pleased today to be here with 3 amazing individuals from Random House Graphic. And we have Gina Gagliano, who's the publishing director. We have Whitney Leopard, who's a senior editor. And we have Patrick Crotty, who's a senior designer. I really am excited for this panel because I have known Gina for quite some time. She and I talked a lot when I worked on the Comics Alternative Young Readers Show, and she provided books for me then. And in 2018, everyone, I think, in the industry was excited to learn that Random House Children's Books was announcing the creation of a new comics imprint, and they announced Gina Gagliano as their publishing director. With the motto of a graphic novel on the bookshelf of every child and YA reader, Random House Graphic has introduced a slate of comics from established comics creators such as Lucy Nisley and Erica Moen, as well as debuts by Mika Song and a whole bevy of wonderful comics creators. I really encourage everyone to head over to Random House Graphic's site to see really the incredible graphic novels that have come out in the last couple of years from them. So we're going to begin today by having the panelists introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their roles at Random House Graphic and sort of what a typical day would be like for you in your job. So Gina, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here at the MSU Comics Forum and talking to all of you. And thanks for that wonderful introduction, Gwen. I'm so excited to have worked with you for so long and to, be getting to talk to you today, to all of these academics. So at Random House Graphic, I'm the publishing director, which is a job that's a little bit of an enigma. It's one of those jobs that doesn't point to something specific like senior editor or senior designer. And that's because the publisher's job is to do a little bit of everything. So, I work with our amazing team here, Whitney and Patrick, and also our marketing and publicity manager, Nicole Valdez, and talk to them on a daily basis. I also do a lot of work within the structure of Random House and Random House Children's Books, talking to our rights department and our sales department and all the other publishers to be coordinating what we're doing. And I also do some talking to people outside Random House all about comics and graphic novels and about what we're doing inside Random House Graphic in particular. Um, so I would say on a daily basis, I start out by opening my email to see if there's an emergency that is happening, and then do everything from speaking to librarians, to talking to authors, to working with Whitney on scheduling, to looking at cover designs that Patrick has done, and looking at marketing materials that Nicole is doing. So it's a lot of collaborative and really fun work.
Great. Whitney?
Yeah. So I'm the senior editor, and it's editing, which is also one of those things where I'm like, well, I edit the books, and people are always like, well, what does an editor do? There's a lot of things. I would have to say, a big part of being editorial is working with the team, working directly with Patrick on the books, that making sure he has everything he needs to make these beautifully designed books and put them together. Working with Gina to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success when it comes to the imprint at large. And then working with our creators. That's majority of what my job is working with our creators on guiding them and helping them, and doing everything I can to help them make the best story that they want to tell. There's so many amazing people that we work with, and they have such great ideas, and it's basically my job to guide them on the process in order to make that story a real thing, so that people can hold it and read it and enjoy it in their hands. And then, from my day to day, I would say it's email. It's a lot of reading. It's a lot of meetings. It's kind of basically whatever it needs to be. There's no day that's consistent. Sometimes it's talking to agents. Sometimes it's talking to creators. Sometimes it's both. Sometimes it's doing panels and talking to schools, and trying to bring more information about publishing and graphic novel publishing specifically out to students and other people who are interested in entering this field, either as a creator or as someone who wants to become an editor themselves. And it's a lot of collaboration, like Gina said. I feel like overall, editor kind of gets to work with a little bit of everyone. I work with marketing. I work with editorial. You kind of become like the focal point because you're the person who's handling the book. So it's one of those things, like, since I'm the one who touches the book the most, I get to work with everyone else who also needs to touch the book, which is a lot of people in a lot of departments. But it's a fun job. It has its challenges, and it's something that I look forward to every day.
Great, thank you so much. And Patrick?
Yeah, so as a senior designer, essentially what I do is, when we're working with authors and with comics, we're dealing with artwork. So at the end of the day, what I do is assemble all the artwork that we get and condense this into a file that will work for print. So the big part of this is assembling the interiors of the books to get them in a readable format that will work for the printers. And apart from the comic pages, there's a lot of small parts in a book that we don't think about, that the comic authors don't need to think about. Those first few pages at the beginning of a book, or the last pages at the book. Like, these are things that only come from me. And then probably one of the most recognizable parts of being a senior designer that I'm sure people talk about a lot is doing cover design. So that does take up a big chunk of time, and it's definitely one of those things where designing covers, it isn't it's not something that comes from just me. There's a lot of people involved who have their ideas for what they think will be the best cover. So usually it comes down to me trying to find a cover that balances out a lot of these requests. So we have a cover that both the editor, the authors, the publishing director, even sales and marketing all have some sort of input, and you want to sort of make, imagine if you were making food for a big family, and you want to make sure that whatever's on the plate, everybody's going to like it, and nobody's going to leave something on there that they don't like. So that's kind of what we do. And then I'm the person in the kitchen doing all that stuff. And everybody else gets to say, like, oh, this is my favorite fruit, please put this on the plate, and I'll figure out how to get that done. And that's that. That's the main part of being the designer, but
I am never going to argue with a food metaphor, so. All right, so I thought I'd ask you all just a few general questions about the field of children's and young adult comics, and then we can open it up, obviously, to questions. So first of all, I'd love to hear how you feel children's and young adult comics differ from comics that are created for a mainstream adult audience. And also, maybe if you could give us a sense for what the market looks like right now for children's and young adult comics. And you can jump in.
well,
Whitney, do you want to start off?
Yeah,
I'd like to say a thing really quick, though. I
Yeah.
think this is before anybody talks about this, I do think even within children's comics, there's a big difference between children and YA comics.
Yeah.
I think there, seeing what we do, that's definitely where the biggest split is in between, even between the things that we make. Yeah, so that was just a little thing I wanted to say, but Whitney knows definitely a lot more about this because she's the one picking up a lot of the books that we have. So yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say I feel like the the difference isn't necessarily, it's not necessarily kids versus adults. I do feel like it does end up being kind of like age category, because a book that is directed at a younger, like a 4 to 8 age range, is going to be different than a book that we're aiming towards middle grade, which is the 8 to 12, which will be different than the YA, which, you know, is like 13 plus, which then of course is going to be different for adult, which is, you know, 18 plus. But I feel like the biggest difference that I can see, and when it comes to like the market and what I'm seeing out now, is that there's, you know, you see a lot of more books targeted at middle grade, at kids, at YA, and you see more of those in bookstores, and you see more of those graphic novels readily available, but it's different. And you see less like new books coming out for adults, graphic novels specifically. But you see more adult content coming from the direct market, which is the single issue comic book market. It's called direct market because it's supposed to be direct to comic book stores. And I feel like in that market, you see a lot more stories aimed at adults, even though typically their age categories are either it's considered all ages. So they don't say it's adult, they say it's all ages, or it's mature readers. And so majority of their books are considered all ages, even if they're directed at an adult audience. And so I feel like when it comes to the types of stories you see there, a lot of it ends up being, you know, for the younger 4 to 8 kind of category, it's a lot of friendship, it's a lot of like humor based stories. With the middle grade, it's a lot of you know, contemporary school, like some issues, but never anything like too hard when it comes to the issues, but some fun fantasies, humor. You see, you know, you see a little bit of everything when it comes to middle grade, which is something I love. I love seeing a little bit of every single genre out in middle grade. And then when it comes to YA, that's when you can kind of get like to the harder topics, to some you know, you're allowed to have swearing and things like that. Which, you know, helps like age up, but it's adult, it's older characters, because typically in YA the main characters are teen, and that's something that does tend to affect like who is the target audience of a book, though it's not always 100% true, but usually it's whatever the age of the main character is, tends to be like what the target audience of that story is, and so that kind of goes hand in hand.
Yeah, and I would say that paired with that, making comics specifically for kids means some different storytelling decisions than comics for adults. You know, it means a different vocabulary level, which is in part what Whitney was talking about with swearing, but it also means if you're making a comic for 4-year-olds, your vocabulary level is going to be different than if you're writing the great literary American novel. You know, that ties into kind of sophistication and sentence construction, which, you know, same thing. But then also specific for comics, like the panel complexity and the story pacing is going to be different when you're doing something for a younger reader than when you're doing a more adult literary work. And of course, that's not always the case. There are always some exceptions. There are some great slow paced, like gradual narrative adult work. But for younger kids, it is a priority to make books that are challenging for them to read, but easy for them to read as people who are just coming to the comics format.
Right, and that's got to be a concern. There's been a question actually that's come up in the chat related to this topic. You've been asked, how much do you worry about policing the boundaries of appropriate content by readership age ranges, appeal to parents, etc.?
I mean, I feel like when it comes to that, it honestly depends on the subject. I feel like there's been books where we have to like we do have to like take in consideration like what is appropriate for this age range, and some of this isn't necessarily what, you know, it's one of those things being like, it's looking at, okay, so what do 12-year-olds today deal with? What do 12-year-olds, you know about? Because me being a 12-year-old is very drastically different than what I experience is different than what 12-year-olds experience today. But there are also some similarities, because there's some things that like everyone goes through, you know, such as puberty. Unfortunately, none of us were able to escape that. So it's one of those things where there's some things that there are some issues where we try to have those issues, but depending on how far we can explore them or how far or what those specific issues are, it just might change depending on what schools and libraries find appropriate. Because we definitely like want to make sure that our books are something that we can get into as many hands as possible. And so if it's something where we're like, okay, this is a book we're going to do, but then, you know, it ends up on the Gina, what's that list called? The comic.
Do you mean like the Caldecott Award winners, or like
that are banned? Sorry, the banned books.
Yeah.
That list.
that list. So like, you know, it's those are things that we have to take in consideration about. And there's some, like, of course, there's going to be stuff that we don't shy away from. There's going to be stuff that we definitely are like, nope, this is appropriate. No, this is what we're going to do. And we leave it up to the buyer to decide. We leave it up to the parents to decide whether that is appropriate for their children or not. We just create the content, and we believe in the content that we're creating, but at the end of the day, it's more up to the buyer to decide if that's appropriate for their reader.
Could I also say something on this too?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I do think is quite interesting with graphic novels is that this kind of question about appropriate content, while we don't have direct rules about it, the content does end up veering in a different direction just because we see everything. I think especially when you look at YA and YA novels, when it's just written word, they can get into a lot more detail, either about violence or even sexual situations, that in a graphic novel, when it is drawn out, you can't. It's a lot more difficult to balance that line. And for the most part, you know, while we haven't been in any situations where we felt like, okay, we have to take something out, I think it's something that even the writers are just quite aware of, that, you know, there's just this part that, you know, when you're drawing stuff that, you know, like, okay, look, I'm not even gonna consider drawing this because it's going to be too difficult to draw this in a way that that will work. But then on the other hand, like, while this is drawn, I know in animation there's a lot of actual specific rules for children's animation. Like if you're showing a kid on a bike, you have to have them wearing a helmet, and like if you draw them in a car, you have to have them with a seatbelt on. And even like considerations where I know in France they have this thing where like if there's a kid walking with an adult, that adult has to be a parent of them, just because of the laws. Like they want to show like, okay, this is the safest situation for the children to be in. I'm pretty sure we don't have a list like that for graphic novels. So again, we do have a bit more freedom, but there are things like this that exist. And I do think, you know, while we're not like trying to like be edgy and showing kids not wearing helmets, you know, these are small things that we do care about. And especially in the drawings, like if we see something that feels like, hey, this maybe doesn't feel like a great drawing, maybe you could do something to make this situation look like better in the artwork, we do that. And Whitney, and even from time to time when Gina is editing a book, and I also see the artwork, like we all bring these things up because it is this extra content to a story that exists outside of the writing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's true, by the way, my students in YA literature courses have no trouble reading about sort of graphic sexual content, but the minute we pull in a graphic novel, suddenly and it's wonderful because it brings up this incredible conversation about the power of visual imagery. So does anyone else want to comment on this topic before we move on to other ones?
Yeah, I mean, so here I would say, I feel like we as publishers in general, and then especially as kids publishers, get asked about appropriate content all the time. And every time we do, I feel like there's a shade of, are you censoring authors? Is mainstream publishing kind of going to change what an author is doing and the creative vision that they bring to their work? And my instinct is always to be like, no, like we give our authors the freedom to tell the stories that they want. But in the same way, there is a balance, I think, of working in mainstream publishing means both realizing the author's vision and realizing the author's vision in a way that we feel is best going to connect to the audience of, in our case, children.
Yeah.
And so when we sign up books, people are very aware that we are a children's publisher. And I think especially people who are doing media for children are excited about kids reading their books and connecting with children. So people take very seriously the idea of making content that is going to work best for kids, which in some cases can mean it's going to be really controversial and challenging, and it's going to really make people think, and it might end up on the banned books list. And that's great. Like, that's an exciting type of publishing that we really embrace. So we are excited to be doing that and making sure that those stories and those voices work in the best way possible, the way that the author has the vision for.
That's great. Well, why don't we move for a moment into genre? Because I've noticed that in your current catalog, you have a wide range of genres, including nonfiction, animal fantasy, magical realism. How do you go about developing and curating a new imprint and thinking about genre?
Whitney has a lot of charts. But I mean, we really start on with our motto, which is a graphic novel on every bookshelf. So we basically start out with a goal of having books for every different reader across genres, across age categories, across fiction and nonfiction. And then we go from there.
Yeah, I think it becomes easy because we work as a team and we try to, whenever we have acquisitions come up or projects come up that we're interested in, we share it with each other. So, it's one of those things where we can have a conversation where it's like, hey, Whitney, this is the third book that you brought up that's kind of similar. Maybe you have a preference for these type of stories. And I'll be like, oh, no, you're right. We already have something that fills this space. So we need to continue to look for something new, because our goal is a book, like a graphic novel, for every type of reader. And so in order to do that, we need to have every type of book out there. And there's all these amazing stories and all these amazing creators. But that means that if we really want to achieve that goal, we can't just do every single thing that comes our way. We have to make sure that we're careful about what we're curating so that we can try to represent like a variety of genres and make sure that whenever we are putting our lists together and when we're putting our books together, that we keep an eye on the books we're putting together. So it's not like we just have a season where it's like, and in this season, every character somehow all has the same name and they all are dealing with a contemporary magical issue and they all have like a sidekick animal. And then you're sitting here going like, how did this happen? Like, we were very careful about that. And we want to make sure that, we have just a diverse amount of stories, and we just want to make sure that we have different authors and different characters and different stories for every reader to enjoy, because that's what we're working towards.
Great. Well, I guess the other thing that, and Gina, you've alluded to this a little bit, but there's another player, right, who you have to think about, and that's parents, teachers, librarians, who also are going to be interested in what you're putting out. I'm kind of interested to know when it comes to encouraging people to share comics with young people, or to really begin to embrace the comics that you're putting out. What kind of strategies do you use?
Yeah, so this is an initiative that our marketing manager, Nicole Valdez, takes point on, and she's amazing. And, really we do a whole lot of things. The first thing I would say is providing resources for teachers and parents. We do some different pamphlets and handouts that we distribute to schools and libraries and bookstores. Another thing is that we focus on review and award attention when we're publishing books. So we send our books to trade reviews. We, talk up our books to trade reviewers, and we send them and pitch things to get starred reviews, so that teachers and librarians will be able to point to, this has a star from Publishers Weekly or Kirkus or Library Journal. And, that's recognized as a value and credibility with their schools and libraries and with parents. We also send our books to awards committees and reading lists. So we work a lot with the American Library Association. We work with the Children's Book Council to make sure that our books that are eligible get on lists like the Great Graphic Novels for Teens list, or the Rainbow list, or the Best Books for Young Adults list. Because those lists basically give teachers and librarians a thing to hold up when they are like, I have to defend this graphic novel to people. We also ourselves go and talk to librarians and educators about the importance and value of kids comics. We were just this past week talking to the California School Library Association. And the final thing to say about this is that I started working in kids comics 15 years ago, and there was a lot of hesitation and a lot of reservations about kids comics in schools and libraries and in the classroom. Not necessarily from teachers and librarians who were super excited about the format, but from the people they were working with, both like library directors and principals, and also parents. And what we're seeing is that that is really changing. We still get this question all the time. And I was in a webinar yesterday with the Art, which is a library distributor, where it came up as well. But as soon as it came up, I had librarians chiming in to be like, oh, here's what I do at my school, and here's what I do at my school. And, it's really easy to give people a rationale to keep comics in the school library and in the classroom, because, we've all done it so many times. Mm-hmm. I was talking to a teacher who I've been working with like about as long as I've known you, who was telling me, it was tough introducing comics for the first time, but by now all the parents are super on board, and we haven't had someone come to ask us if comics are real reading, for the past 5 years or so. So that's really great. That's not a place that I expected to get to as quickly as we have. And I think it's a real exciting sign of change in the industry.
Great. Well, one thing that has come up in the chat, which is somewhat related to that, is there a certain prejudice against children's and YA comics on the part of comics scholars and journalists? Which is an interesting question for someone like me to read, since I am a comics scholar who writes on children's comics. And so I'm just going to say really quickly to Daniel, who's asked this question, that I think in the past that might have been the case. But what I've found is in the last 5 years, especially, with just the growth in children's comics and the exposure that children's comics are getting for a variety of reasons, some of them just the popularity of comics creators themselves, that isn't so much an issue anymore with, I think, academics who work in comic studies. What you might be referencing is that long time sense that comics creators who are working with or excuse me, comic scholars who are working with adult comics sometimes were worried about, children's comics bringing down the reputation of that. But even that has really gone out the window. At least that's what I've seen. And I don't know, Gina or, Patrick or Whitney, if you've seen that too. But right now, I think children's comics are being embraced by so many people.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say that that's the case. Children's media and adult media is thought about differently, I would say, in the academic space and in the like commercial media space by like the New York Times and Entertainment Weekly and all that sort of thing. And I do think that there's always going to be a bit of a difference there in the way that people think about it. And I don't know that I mind that for all the reasons we were talking about before, about how we think about publishing children's books in specific ways that are different from adult books. So, they, in many cases, will have a different audience that won't necessarily overlap. So I wouldn't necessarily expect to find like a book for 4-year-olds in the same article as a nonfiction political expose, even if they were both nonfiction political exposés, the 4-year-old version and then the adult version. So I would say that there is that distinction, and comics like genre fiction have always had this like, are they as highbrow as literary fiction and nonfiction? Children's books have that same delineation of, are children's books as highbrow and sophisticated as adult literary fiction and nonfiction? So kids comics have the double stigma to deal with. But I do think that with the amount of publishing that's happening in the kids space, as you said, Gwen, that people who are working with this, either journalists or academics, are excited about the opportunities and the potential and the stories that are being told.
Yeah, absolutely. There have been a lot of questions in the chat that are focused specifically on the publishing industry. So if you wouldn't mind, I'll ask you those, and then we can see if there's other questions that come up. But one commenter has asked, what can the publishing industry as a whole do to promote more diversity, not just in content, but in creative teams?
Like, I'm sorry, creative teams as in authors? Well, I mean, I guess even if it's authors or in-house, I would say something that the publishing industry can do would be to hire more different voices and more BIPOC editors, more BIPOC publishers, more people who have different experiences. I think having people on both the creative side as an author and then also on the publishing side is really important to have representation on both sides, and then work on creating safe spaces for more voices and for more people with different experiences. I feel like those would be in my experience, I would say that those would be the two key things that I think publishing could do.
We've also had questions about publishing timetables. So you're kind of laughing, Whitney. So the question specifically is, Tom Pico and Karen Sachs' second Aster book is due to drop soon. Can you tell us when and how you began to get out the word about that book? So how do you promote it? Oh, look.
So for when it comes to promotion, I didn't know if this was going to be about like how long it takes a graphic novel to be made, and I was about to be like, it depends. But for promotion, and Gina, you would have more experience on this. I believe we start talking about books. Well, I mean, as soon as we announce that we have the books, and then there'll be like a period of time of creation, and then as soon as like links start going live, as soon as we have a cover, as soon as basically we can start getting that information out there, and we can start linking people onto like where you can pre-order But I feel like it's usually a buildup that's like starts typically 6 months before the on sale date, that then just starts slowly ramping up as we get closer and closer to the on sale date.
Yeah, and so here we have our two Aster books, right? So this is the new one, and this is a first edition of the first one, where you can see in the back that it says Aster will return. Yeah, so we are very much thinking as forward as possible, you know, both in the first volume of series about the second one, and then, you know, in-house talking to our sales team and them going out and talking to booksellers and libraries and distributors about the books that we're doing. And, you know, so people in the public space, which sometimes includes academics, might hear about something when it's coming out. But we just had our first internal meetings with our sales team a month ago about our spring 2022 books, which is the season that starts in January. So that's the season when, that is the point at which our marketing and publicity team start gearing up to work on things.
Great. I want to mention that the cover is gorgeous. Patrick, do you want to talk a little bit about working on this series and the cover? Because it really is, it's arresting. It's quite nice.
On specifically the Aster books.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is kind of an interesting case because these are translations. So we were fortunate in this case to get to do a new cover. That's not always something you get to do when you're working with translations, but we did for this one. And the other thing is that we know this is going to be a series. So, it's kind of funny. This is also one of the very first books that I worked on when we started out here at Random House Graphics. So I think for this, usually the conversation will go that I will be speaking with the editor, and the editor who, you know, they will have some idea of what type of emotion or feeling that they want the book to show off. Because, you know, if there is a book if this book was like really sad, then maybe Whitney would be like, okay, I want the cover to look really sad, and we'll be figure out how to do that. So those are the kind of questions I usually want to ask the editor, like, would you want the reader to feel when they see this book cover? Like, what is the first impression you want to get when you see this? And outside of those notes, then we'll go to sketching. And then from that, I'll develop a few sketches, go back to the editor, show them like, okay, which of these sketches do you like the most? We'll talk about them, figure out the direction we want to take it in. And then once we're there, we'll go forward with it. So that's what happened with this book. And in this case, after we came through with some sketches that we liked, we were able to send them back to the French publisher, who then sent them to the author. And then they worked up a new illustration for the cover and then sent it back to us. The title, that's all done on my end. So that is just completely me. But the artwork is always going to be the author who's doing the book.
And actually, that brings up a question for Wendy, perhaps, Whitney, because you had talked about the time that it takes to get a book from start to finish, and that it varied. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing for a graphic novel on how long it's going to take is how many pages it is. So like if you have a graphic novel that's 80 pages, it's going to take a lot less time than a graphic novel that's 300 pages. But that's like the variance that you can see in graphic novels. And it also depends on how fast the author is whenever they're working on it and bringing it to life. I would say typically for the shorter graphic novels, they can be anywhere from like once you get all that you know, not contract nonsense out of the way, then it's like then it's the script and getting it to work. And I feel like the fastest it can be like 6 months for a shorter comic, like, and I mean like one of the 80-page ones, maybe it depends on the creator, and then typically to a year and a half, 2 years for a 200-page graphic novel. So you know, and it really depends. Some people will be faster, some people will take longer. There's definitely some books that we have on our list that no one's going to see until 2024, and maybe even 25. And that's not because it's just a really, it's just one of those things where, like, these books are long books and they take a lot of time, and you have someone who's not only writing it, but after they write it, they then have to draw it, and then they have to color it, and then they have to letter it. Like, they are doing everything, and there's a lot of pieces that go in, on top of, like, having to deal with me giving them notes and feedback along the way, and slowing down their process, and then also getting feedback, and and then jumping into working with Patrick on the covers, because, like, they work very hand in hand, and they collaborate together on how these books come together, and then if we have any feedback from sales and marketing and stuff like that. So there's a lot of hands that can kind of come into play, but graphic novels themselves, I think typically we try to plan for them to have at least 2 years in development, just for the book itself, and that doesn't even include, like, sending it to the printer, and then when we'll get it back to the warehouse, and then all the sales and marketing that leads up to it going on sale. So it can be a very timely and very long process, but it's definitely one that's worth it at the end of the day once you get a hold of one of those books.
Yeah, absolutely. One question that's come up in the chat, and I bet a lot of people are thinking about this, is the question simply is stated, how does one work for a publisher? But maybe we could turn that around a little bit and say, if you'd like to also comment how you got into working in this field and what you brought to it. So
I went to art school. My major was sequential art, so I got a degree in comic books. And I realized that I wanted to be an editor once I met editors and discovered that you could be an editor, because that was something that I did not know was a job until my senior year of college. And then whenever after college, I freelanced for a few years, and then I ended up getting an internship at a very, very small publisher in Los Angeles. And then after I completed that internship, I was able to get a job at a direct market publisher called Boom Studios. They're known for Lumberjanes and the Adventure Time comics. Those are the books that I work on. So I'm like, these are the books that, and so I was an editor there. I started off as an assistant, and then worked my way up so that until I was running the Kaboom All Ages imprint, which is their kid specific imprint. And then from there, I worked there for over 7 years. And then Gina reached out to me about this new imprint she was starting in New York City, and would I want to join her team? And I was very excited about this opportunity to come work on a whole new imprint, but also get to work on just all original graphic novels, and just to kind of see how we could continue to grow this space. And that's kind of how my shift in my career worked. It was basically all editorial, though.
Right. Patrick?
Yeah, so I feel like whenever these conversation comes up, that everybody's gonna give some ridiculous path that they took to get here that is gonna be really hard to replicate. So I don't know if this is helpful, but it's a funny story. But I moved here from Sweden 5 years ago, but about 10 years ago, when I was still living in Sweden, I started a printing press. And before that, I went to college for advertising and PR. So I don't have an art background, but I'm not drawing comics, so whatever. But I started printing press with 2 art student friends, and very early on in the printing press, we were using it to also publish comic or make small comics. And the comics started doing well outside of Sweden. And there was like at one point a couple years in, we're like, you know what, we should just stop doing the printing press and only make books, which we did. So this publisher was called Peow, by the way, so Peow. And that was something that I worked on for a long time. So we were making independent comic books from Sweden, but for the rest of the world. And we also even managed to change like Swedish culture legislation to allow culture grants to be funded to English books by Swedish authors. So we did like a lot of work for comics in Sweden, to just be seen outside of out of that country. And then I moved back here about 5 years ago, and the idea was to help this the comics that I was making be spread out more in the US. But at that time, I also started working at SVA. So I was teaching a comics class there, a continuing ed class for mini comics and risograph printing. So yeah, and I actually just started taking a class again. I really do think like teaching about comics is so fun. It's like really enjoyable. Um, and there's so many great young people getting into comics today, like even more and more now. And I think like just the idea of how to educate about comics has grown so much. So um, sorry for that tangent, but anyway, so I was here in the US doing my comics thing, teaching, and I was always had like some goal that I wanted to work at a big publisher, just to see the different side of things from working independently for so long. Like I think it's so important to see all different sides of things, because comics is a very wide field of art, and I think it's important to just be able to experience different forms of it. And it was really hard. It's super hard to break into comics publishing, I feel, like as a job, because book publishing is quite small and you're already here there, like you have to know somebody. And comics publishing within that is even smaller. It's like it was spooky when you don't know anybody. But I think, you know, I had met Gina throughout some years of going to comic festivals and all that. And when this imprint was starting up, we met to talk about things. And then I realized like halfway through, like, this is really weird. Like, why would Gina want to just talk to me about comics? And I'm like, this has to be like, because she's starting some new imprint thing. And it turns out it was. So yeah, I got roped in that way, which was like really great. And now I'm over here.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my experience is that I have worked my whole career in the comics part of Big Five book publishing. So before I was at Random House, I was at Macmillan at their first, second imprint. And I got into comics and book publishing because I was a reader all my life and I loved books. And you know, I blame science fiction and fantasy novels for having extensive author's notes in the back that gave me this window into, oh, there's like people who are working on the other end of making these books. And once I realized that as a kid, I was like, this is going to be my career. This is what I want to do. And the job I had at First Second was my first job out of college, and I've been working in book comics publishing since then. But I think something that's really great about Random House Graphic is that all our staff, Whitney, Patrick, and our marketing and publicity manager, Nicole, who used to be at DC Comics, came from a different part of the comics publishing industry. So it's like together we become this transformer of comics backgrounds with all the different knowledge from these different spaces.
Yeah, that I was noticing that and hearing you talk, and it is, I think that must make for really interesting conversations too about the market. And to that end, there's a question in the chat. How has publishing changed since the digital age? Do you feel that physical books will survive, or has the digital empire taken over?
Physical books will always survive. There's just I feel like that's been something that I've heard even since I was a kid. Like as soon as stuff started going digital, as soon as there was audiobooks, as soon as the internet became like bigger and bigger and bigger, continued to explode, it was always just like, well, one day everything will be, you know, you'll read books through your glasses and you won't, you know. And I'm sitting here going like, one day maybe, but it's I feel like that conversation has just been around forever. But what I've noticed is that the traditional book market, where like the physical books, those sales only continue to grow. So I'm not worried about losing physical books. In fact, I love them. As y'all can see by my shelves behind me, I will always be a physical book reader. I still read digital books too, because I don't have enough space in my New York apartment for all the books that I want to read, but I do think that there will always be a space for physical books.
Yeah, I really don't think that it goes away. There's like this sense of just owning physical objects that people will always do, and the ability to have digital books has existed for so long. I think people are just attracted to having things or consuming media in the way that's most comfortable to them. And currently, I think that the digital format for books, and especially comics, it still is really far away from a physical book. For other things, like if you watch like a movie or a DVD, the DVD isn't, you don't get enjoyment out of holding the DVD. You watch it on the screen, and that's the thing. And watching something over Netflix, there's no difference in fact how you consume it. You're still watching a screen. So that, I think that is a comparison that a lot of people make, is like, oh, well, what happened to DVDs and CDs? Like, those disappeared. But it's not the act of holding the CD that makes it interesting. The thing with the books is the format is holding the book. It is the paper. It's not looking at it on a screen. So that's definitely one of the really strong reasons why I think like books are just going to work more, because the technology behind a book, just like seeing something on paper, it's it's the better option. And you know, people just like have bookshelves. Otherwise, what would we put on our bookshelves if we didn't have books? So yeah, I'm really not, I'm not worried that it's going to go away. But on the other hand, I do think that there's still room for digital to grow. I think digital needs to find its own way. Like with webtoons, if you look at those, the comics that are built from the ground up for a digital platform, those are doing something interesting, because it's taking storytelling and not trying to make a book on the computer. It's making a story for the computer first, or your phone first. And that is like a different direction. And again, it's not taking away from books, because they were never printed as a book in the first place. So there's always going to be room for both. And it's one of those things where I'm like, I know I'm probably optimistic, but I'm never scared about books going away.
A question that's come up actually dovetails with something I thought I would ask you, which is, maybe some of that you might want to discuss some of the high points over the last 2 years, and also what the future looks like. But I'm going to sort of also weave in one of the questions over here. Any project or subgenre that you're craving to see but haven't gotten to yet? So I know that's a lot, but just thinking about what you've achieved and what you hope to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, well, I would say our first high point is that we launched last January. So we are now an imprint that has been publishing books for 13 months. And yeah, we just had our 1-year anniversary last month at the end of January. And in that, so, we've had our first year of comics come out, and it's been really amazing, where, we've gotten starred reviews for a number of books. We've gotten on the Indie Next list for, in fact, all of our 2020 books. And the Indie Next list is a bookseller best of list. And that's amazing. And then we've also gotten some award honors and recognition, like our graphic novel, The Magic Fish, was a GLAAD honor book. Our graphic novel, Don't Feed the Squirrels, was a Griffin honor book, which is a CCCB like Great Transitional Read Award, which is just fantastic. So it was great to watch all of these books come out last year, despite the last year that we had in the world all around us. And then at the end of the year, to just see the reception, and libraries and media committees like really coming to them and recognizing how amazing these authors are.
Yeah. I was trying to be like, man, I feel like there's been so many best of in the past 2 years. A personal best of is I finally live in a place that has seasons. That's always been a goal of mine. I grew up in Texas, and when I worked at Boom, it was in Los Angeles. So to live in a place that like rains and snows and actually has 4 seasons out of the year is a personal highlight. But I mean, just honestly, every month that we have a book come out, every month that we get a book that we've been working on for over 2 years, and we get to hold it in our hands. I can't, it's one of those things where I'm sitting here going like, is there one book that sticks out? And I'm like, they all stick out, because every single time I get a hold of a book, I'm just so excited that it's real and that readers are going to be able to find it and pick it up. And trying to think of something that I'm excited about and for like the coming future. I mean, all of our books. But I would say what I'm most excited about will be whenever we're able to have our imprint out and have books coming out not in a pandemic. That is what I am most excited about, to be able to go to a bookstore easily on book sale days, and to be able to talk to book buyers and booksellers in person, and be able to have that experience again, because that's definitely something I miss.
Yeah, and actually related to this, one of the things that has been asked, and I'm sure that the answer is going to vary, but how many books do you work on at the same time? In fact, the person who asked this question said, any time management tips are welcome. I always welcome those too, so.
A lot.
Yeah, it's, ugh, I want to answer this too, because
Yeah.
like,
You answer this one.
so each season of books, so we have 3 seasons in a year. So we're currently working on around 5 to 6 books per season. And the thing is that it's not like you work on one season at a time. These seasons will overlap. So at certain points, you're working on 10 books at a time. You're not doing like 1 hour per book per day, 10-hour day, but it can be quite a lot. And I think the time management, it's rough. Like we work overtime a lot. I think my best time management is hope and pray that your team can grow. and because like that's it. Like, and the secret is, even if you just see the 3 of us and Nicole, who Gina has been mentioning, who's our marketing PR, we have other people working with us. Like Whitney doesn't do the copy editing. Like we send our books. Well, you do a portion of copy editing, but like we have other people that we send it to. And for me, I send books to a production person who checks that the files are 100% compatible for the printers. So it's more than just the 3 of us. I think if you're like at a really small press, and you look at what we do, you'd be like, oh my gosh, that's like, how do they manage? But you have to remember, like, PRH is a big company, and we have other departments, and we have a lot of people that can help out. Like a computer problem, we can ask for help. But yeah, again, like 5 to 6, like we're working on 5 to 6 books at a time most of the time, sometimes more.
I would say usually more, because you have to account for it. Well, it's one of those things that it's like Patrick said, where it's like these seasons, it's not like we work on it being like, okay, we have 3 months to make this book exist. Basically, as soon as we acquire a book, we're working on it. And if it takes 2 to 3 years for a graphic novel to exist, then we're acquiring essentially, books that far in advance. And it's not like, I mean, granted, it's not like I'm actively working on, 60 books every single year, every single second, every single day, because everyone has different deadlines, they turn things in. But that's kind of like what the juggling act is because everything's constantly moving and everything's constantly changing depending on what needs to have your hands on it and what doesn't need to have your hands on it. So we have a lot of books that we're all constantly working on, but we all work on them at different stages. I would say the best time management tip I can give you is make sure that you always have your calendar up to date, and that you have, like, if you are a to-do list person, like keep that like as accurate. I break down my to-do list by day. Granted, I don't always accomplish everything I want in those days, but just by having it broken down by day helps me keep my days organized in a way where it's like, okay, I know on this day these are my big ticket items, and going from there. Hopefully that'll be helpful, but those are like the big things that help me be organized in the day-to-day process.
Well, this is perfect because we are right at 3:00. I heard the magic bell ring. I want to thank you all so much for being so generous with your time, answering the questions, and really giving us a good sense of what goes on at Random House Graphics. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Gwen.
Yeah, thank you too.
Yeah, and thanks to MSU Comics Forum for having us and letting us come talk about the exciting world inside publishing.
Thanks so much. Of course, it's always great to get the inside information. And we welcome the opportunity to speak with publishers at the MSU Comics Forum and get your take on how the thing that we all love so much is evolving and changing in a dynamic marketplace. So it is 3 o'clock and we do have a break. We will be back at 3:15. So, but thank you so much again to all the participants in this roundtable, giving us the insights on publishing and graphic novels.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks so
Bye-bye.
much. Take care. Bye-bye.